Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be discussing the titles of mystery novels not written by Agatha Christie. I already did a Christie version of this, and this video will cover all of the authors I have already covered on this channel, plus Arthur Conan Doyle. I know when I do these like other authors videos, good authors get left out. So I will likely return to the subject and other subjects further down the line as I cover more and more writers. So don't think I'm neglecting anyone. I get a lot of Ruth Rendell requests, so I might just skip the poll next time and go right to Ruth Rendell. She'd probably win a poll anyway. But anywho, in this video, I will be discussing the best and worst titles from each of these authors, and I mean the actual titles. And you can check out my Christie video on titles for my criteria here. And I will not be spoiling anything outright, although I will refer to certain titles as spoilery. I'll let you know when it's coming. Again, I won't be outright spoiling things, but you may be pushed in a certain direction. But before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. All right, let's start with Ngaio Marsh and Roderick Allen. She has quite a few good ones. Enter a Murderer is a great title. It's a quote from Macbeth. Very ominous, very Shakespearean, so of course it's fitting for her. It sets up the plot of the murder on stage. It's also a bit of a clue, but not a spoiler one. So I think that's a brilliant title. Death and Ecstasy is one of those titles that I think is better now than it was in 1936. The titular ecstasy refers to a religious sort of high, but there's a lot of drugs in this book, and ecstasy is also a drug. It wasn't in 1936, but it is now, so I think that's a fun little fact there. Overture to Death, another great title. If you actually listen to the musical pieces mentioned in the book, you will get this very ominous sense of impending death. It works very well. Surfeit of Lampreys is fantastic. It's a play on words. Henry VIII allegedly died from food poisoning after, eating lampreys, and the Lamprey family of the novel are basically leeches and gorge themselves on luxuries they can't afford. I've always liked that title. Dyed in the Wool is another fun double entendre. Dyed in the wool means you're very loyal. That's the theme of this novel, but it's also just a direct mention of the victim who was found dead in a large wool bale. Fantastic body discovery, honestly. Maybe the best in all of the Golden Age. My absolute favorite Marsh title is Swing Brother Swing. Marsh has a lot of these sort of double meaning titles. Swing Brother Swing refers to the obvious jazz swing tone of the novel, but also the more ominous swinging of the hangman's noose. I'll do a video on covers at some point, but the original cover of this novel is a noose swinging back and forth, extremely ominous, and also has that like mocking tone with the lightness of the actual book. Scales of Justice, another good double meaning, referring to the actual scales of justice you see, in statues of justice, but also refers to fish scales, which act like fingerprints and are by the means through which justice is delivered in this book. Off with His Head, obviously from Alice in Wonderland. Another rather joking title that is extremely accurate and gruesome. The final title to highlight here is Light Thickens, another Macbeth quote. This novel is essentially Marsh's final production of Macbeth, and she put on Macbeth productions a lot in her life. And Light Thickens is a title, she fought very hard to get. I mean, we know from her letters that her editors thought the title was too obscure, and I understand, if you don't get the reference, you sort of miss out on the meaning. Light thickens and the crow makes wing to the rooky woods, meaning, the time is coming. When light thickens, that means it's getting darker. And, you did what you did, and now you reap the benefit and suffer the consequences. I'm sure a Shakespearean scholar would put it much better than I did, but that's just a wonderful title for that book. And Ngaio Marsh has a few duds, mostly because they get spoilery. I don't want to fault the nursing home murderer, but this is one of those ones that I think Americans interpret differently. I first read this book, I was expecting a murder in, an old age home, not a private hospital. Again, it's mainly cultural. Why this didn't get changed for American audiences, I don't know. Death at the Bar is another one of those double meanings. This one's a bit more spoilery. It's not like too bad, but still a bit of a problem. Death and the Dancing Footman, I hate. I do not like this title. As I mentioned earlier, Marsh does have these sort of like jokingly mocking titles that work. This one doesn't. It's really disjointed from the tone of the book, which is heavily psychological. Also, I get really bothered by the focus on the footman, who is like barely in the book and not really that important. Another spoilery ish one is color scheme, although to be honest, it did take me a while to see that, so maybe it's not so spoilery. Black as He's Painted is a title that I just don't think has aged well. It's a pun on the victim's race. Not that it's offensive necessarily, but I think it could have been better, especially since this book is basically, a treatise on anti racism. Sorry, it's against racism. And also, I think you could misinterpret the title word of black to mean like evil, like a black soul. Not great. I mean, there is a character who has that. But again, I think the obvious implication, might not be great, especially to a modern ear. There are worse for sure. And this final one is the title, in my opinion, is like big time spoilery, absolutely awful, and it's Grave Mistake. And if you know, you know. This book chugs along just so delightfully, and it's fantastic. And then you get to a certain point, and you go, oh, well, the title just spoiled it for me. I was so disappointed the first time I read this book because of that. Truly a big mistake here with that title. And let's get into alternate titles for Roderick Allen novels. I'm not going to do the foreign language titles like I did with Christie, but I will focus my discussion here on just like, a bunch of my favorite titles of these that have multiple. Vintage Murder was only published under that title, but it had a working title of The Case of the Greenstone Tiki. I think Vintage Murder is better. Vintage referring to the wine bottle that's the murder weapon, and also has this like nostalgic feel to it. The Greenstone Tiki is relevant, but I do think the vintage part is better. Survey of Lampreys was called Death of a Peer in the US. I would stick with Survey of Lampreys for the reasons I already laid out. Swing Brother Swing was called A Wreath for Rivera in the US. The alternate title is a bit spoilery, although it's one you'd have to read the book. Opening Night was called Night at the Vulcan, and I'm unsure here. I mean, Opening Night is a little generic, although it does apply pretty well to the novel. Night at the Vulcan is a little bit more specific, but it doesn't tell you much about the plot as Opening Night, so I would stick with Opening Night. Spinsters in Jeopardy is not the best title, but the US title of Bride of Death is even worse. I'm not even sure what that's referencing in the book. Bride of Death is a good title, but not for this novel. I really don't know where it comes from. I guess it's supposed to be Ginny joining the cult, I guess. I don't know. Spinsters in Jeopardy would be my pick. Off with His Head had a US title of Death of a Fool, and both are really good titles, but obviously I'm picking Off with His Head. How could I not? So much action in that title. I love it. Death at the Dolphin had a US title of Killer Dolphin. The titular dolphin here is a theater in this novel, so I would say Death at the Dolphin is better. I mean, Killer Dolphin is fine, but I think that could easily give the wrong impression. It also seems to be blaming the Dolphin Theater for the murder, which, I mean, I guess is not entirely wrong, but I think Death at the Dolphin is just better. Let's move on to Ellery Queen's good titles. I don't find many Queen titles to be noteworthily bad or good, but some good ones are Calamity Town, referring to this town of Wrightsville as a calamity, is really apt, not just for this novel, but for this arc in Ellery Queen's story. He keeps coming back to this town where tragedy after tragedy occurs. Cat of Many Tails, a very fun title. The double meaning, of tail like an animal and a tale like a story, really at play here. The title works very well with the novel, especially with the original cover. The Finishing Stroke is a good title. It provides a clue that the reader will certainly miss, even if you haven't read it. Me telling you this isn't going to get you any further, believe me. I mean, I think it could be more Christmassy, but whatever. My personal favorite Queen title is The Fourth Side of the Triangle, which I'm sure you're thinking that doesn't make any sense, but it actually does if you read the book. It's a very intriguing title. It refers to a love triangle slash love square or rectangle. It does make sense when you read the book. And for the bad, again, not too many noteworthy ones. The obvious thing to talk about here is the nationality titles like the Roman Hat Mystery, the Siamese Twin Mystery, etc. I don't think they're bad, but some of them are a little forced. And I've always been bothered by the cousins abandoning this motif. Obviously, it marks one era of Ellery Queen, and they ran out of ideas for it, but still. The Murderer is a Fox, and slight spoiler here, I love this title. Unfortunately, it's a bad one because it's somehow both a spoiler and inaccurate. I won't explain how, but amazing how that worked. It both spoils the plot and is also wrong. Double Double is a nursery rhyme title, and though it fits story wise, I think the tone is a bit off. It contrasts with There Was an Old Woman, another nursery rhyme title that actually does fit the tone well. The Scarlet Letters is obviously too close to the name of the Scarlet Letter. If you Google the Scarlet Letters, you get 0 results for Ellery Queen, and you get Nathaniel Hawthorne instead. Obviously, this wasn't a problem in 1953 without Google, but it is now. And the last one here is Inspector Queen's Own Case. Obviously, very generic. It highlights this book as an Inspector Queen protagonist novel, not Ellery. I think they could have done better, but none of these are truly awful. There aren't too many alternate titles for Ellery Queen novels. Halfway House had a working title of The Swedish Match Mystery. I prefer Halfway House, referring to the crime scene where a victim would switch personalities while leading his double life. Swedish Match Mystery would be more convenient because this is technically a nationality title. It's from the same era, but it has that feel. But the Swedish Match Mystery is really forced in there. Halfway House is better. The Dragon's Teeth was also published as The Virgin Heiresses, and I do prefer Dragon's Teeth. The Virgin Heiresses is certainly more descriptive and gives a better indication of the plot, but is also a little uncomfortable for a book title. Dragon's Teeth, and I have to be honest that don't remember this book at all, but I believe Dragon's Teeth here refers to the legend that if you plant a dragon's tooth, a warrior arises from it. There may be another in-book explanation, but I definitely prefer Dragon's Teeth. And the only other alternate title for a Queen novel is There Was an Old Woman, which was also called The Quick and the Dead. There Was an Old Woman is a much better title. It's a nursery rhyme, but it's the rare one that fits both the plot and the tone. And it's a very good title. The Quick and the Dead, I guess, is a reference to the gun duel that happens, but this is all pre the war and the Western movies with that name. It's also a phrase found in the Bible, but in that case, the word quick means living, not fast. I don't really like or fully understand that title here. On to Miss Silver and Patricia Wentworth, and I'm still honoring my promise to be nice to her. And there are some good titles here. I think The Case is Closed. It's a complete sentence, which I frown upon, but it sets the right tone. The Clock Strikes 12 is much the same thing while adding the element of anticipation on New Year's Eve. The Catherine Wheel is a very good title. It's the name of the inn, I believe, in the book, but also refers to the torture device of St. Catherine and the torture the characters are experiencing. The Listening Eye is a good title as well. It refers to our victim who is deaf, so she can read lips and so she listens with her eyes. I like that title a lot. And there are a few bad ones, all of which are just really generic and don't tell me anything about the book at all. In the Balance, The Key, Through the Wall, The Summer House, The Fingerprint, etc. are all books that, could be about anything, really uncreative titles. I'm not even sure what some of them are even referencing. And there are a lot of alternate titles here as well. And weirdly, the alternate titles are all the British titles. Normally with the Golden Age, the books still in print today use the original British titles, while the US titles are the alternates. But with Miss Silver, it's actually the American titles that are in print, at least for the novels that have more than one name. But anyway, In the Balance is also called Danger Point, and I prefer Danger Point. It sounds more interesting. I never really understood the name In the Balance anyway, and it tells me nothing about the book. Not sure what it's referencing. And not that Danger Point does either, but at least that sounds more interesting and intriguing. Miss Silver Deals with Death is also called Miss Silver Intervenes. I like both of these titles. I think they both treat death and murder with the gentle ladiness of Miss Silver. It's very quaint in an ironic way for this novel's content. I would prefer Miss Silver Intervenes. It actually reminds me of Miss Pym Disposes, which is another good title. She Came Back is also called The Traveler Returns. I prefer The Traveler Returns. She Came Back is actually a little misleading as a title, while The Traveler Returns is less generic and I think a little more accurate. Dark Threat is also called Pilgrim's Rest. I have to be honest, I don't remember this book at all. Dark Threat sounds more ominous, while Pilgrim's Rest probably fits the tone a lot better, but I think I would prefer Dark Threat. Wicked Uncle is also called Spotlight. Wicked Uncle is so much better. It's much more descriptive. I really don't know what Spotlight is referring to, and since that's also now a popular movie, I think Wicked Uncle is just better. Mr. Braiding's collection is also called The Braiding Collection. I have no preference there. It's basically the same title. Death at Deep End is also called Anna, Where Are You? And you know what? I do prefer that Scooby Doo like title, Anna, Where Are You? I mean, this is actually pre Scooby, but that's actually a more representative title than of Death at the Deep End. I mean, Deep End is the name of the house, and I generally prefer not naming titles after like the country house or the victim of the book because a new reader doesn't learn anything from that. And if you're Patricia Wentworth, you're always naming your houses as if they sound like other things, so it could be misleading. And finally, we have the summer house, is also called the gazebo. I prefer the gazebo. I mean, they're the same thing, but in the US, we call that structure a gazebo. So I just know what that is. I mean, the summer house to me indicated like a vacation house, which is not what meant by the title. Anthony Berkeley Cox slash A. Monmouth Plots slash Francis Isles has pretty much all great titles. I mean, some that stand out are the Poison Chocolates case, which has become, an iconic title. Jumping Jenny is such a good title. It refers to a hanged woman, which is what happens to our victim here, but also plays off of the justice and the condemnation. And the victim certainly has been judged and condemned in this novel. Panic Party is such a fun title and very accurate as well, but also, a little ironically playful, which suits the tone so well. Not to be taken, referring to the label on medication, the common directions, not to be taken with whatever when they're potentially dangerous. It's so fitting for that book. And I don't have any title from Berkeley I think is bad. I mean, I guess the Leighton Court Mystery is a little generic, but not bad. So I'm going to go right into alternates. Roger Sheringham and the Vane Mystery is also called Mystery at Lover's Cave, and that is the better title. I guess Roger Sheringham and the Vane Mystery is actually a really bad title now that I think of it. It's very wordy and not descriptive. Mystery at Lover's Cave is both very accurate and sets the proper tone. Jumping Jenny is also called The Dead Mrs. Stratton, which is also a really good title, but I prefer Jumping Jenny. I mean, that title has so many meanings to it, and it's just such a perfect title, as I already explained. Dead Mrs. Stratton is also good and fitting, but I think Jumping Jenny is just perfect. Panic Party is also called Mr. Pigeon's Island, and I prefer Panic Party. I mean, it really sets the fearful mood and the tone while also being a little playful. Mr. Pigeon's Island sounds like it's a location on Sesame Street. I mean, it's funny. It does work for the book, but Panic Party, superior. Mr. Priestley's Problem is also called The Amateur Crime, and I think I prefer The Amateur Crime, and this isn't a mystery novel per se, it's mystery adjacent, and I think Mr. Priestley's Problem puts the focus on Mr. Priestley when this is really like an all-ensemble cast with many characters having lots of problems. The Amateur Crime is much more fitting because that's what's happening in this book. It's an experiment by amateurs having fun, and it sort of ties all these different storylines together. Not to be Taken is also called A Puzzle in Poison. I think both of these are very good. I would prefer Not to Be Taken. I think that's more creative and a title that put a lot of thought went into. It's fitting because of the medicinal reference, which fits the characters. A Puzzle in Poison is good, but also sounds like a sort of title that might have been a little rushed and came out on a whim. Cecily Disappears is also called The Wintering of Mystery, and I prefer Cecily Disappears. I mean, that is the main plot line going on, and while there are other things happening, so maybe Wintering Mystery is more suited because it ties them all together, it's also less exciting. Again, Winteringham is the name of the house. Not that I think the house titles are bad necessarily, but I prefer not using them if possible. Onward to Lord Peter Wimsey. This is another one where I don't think there are bad titles. Dorothy Sayers did a very good job naming her books. Some that stand out are Whose Body, which I just really love the playfulness of that title. The Unpleasantness at the Bellana Club is my favorite title, in addition to being my favorite Wimsey novel. I mean, the word unpleasantness does so much work here, and it's a good word because it's not a tragedy, and its murder status is questionable. Unpleasantness sounds like a pesky problem. It's a very good word to use here. Strong Poison is a very good title. It's actually a quote title from the Ballad of Lord Rendell. A cup of strong poison, mother, make my bed soon. There's a pain in my heart, and I mean to lie down. It really sets the melancholy tone of that novel and all the romantic stuff going on with Peter and Harriet, and also the murder means. Have his carcass is so good. I love the word carcass being used to describe a dead body, and Murder Must Advertise is a very creative title. I love how it's plot specific and refers to the advertising agency. It's very good. And I think the only bad title here is Unnatural Death. And I know I'm probably reading too much into this. The title almost certainly refers to the main victim who was believed to have died a natural death but didn't. That's not a spoiler. But I think there is also a second meaning here, and I think it's a homophobic slur. I know people disagree, but this book has a very unsavory depiction of a lesbian, and her lifestyle during this time in history is constantly referred to as unnatural. So I think there's a chance this exists as a double meaning and an unpleasant one. Am I reading too much into it? Probably. An Unnatural Death is the only whimsy title with an alternate title, The Dawson Pedigree, which I still don't like. It sounds like it's referring to dogs. I'm going to stick with Unnatural Death, even though I just ripped it to shreds. You can yell at me in the comments, but Unnatural Death, if it doesn't have that other meaning, it's really a good and apt title. Next up is Albert Campion and Margery Allingham. Again, this is another batch. I don't find titles either like noteworthily good or bad. The Tiger in the Smoke is the best title for sure. I mean, it's extremely evocative of the setting and the plot and the mood. You know, it has several meanings to it. It's extremely creative. More Work for the Undertaker is a great title. I like the gallows humor of it all. That's probably my personal favorite title. Is it the best? No, Tiger in the Smoke is probably the best. I guess the worst title here is Hide My Eyes. Doesn't tell me anything about the plot. Not sure I really get the connection to the novel that well. And we also have like some generic ones like The Mind Readers, The China Governess, but those are at least like a little better than generic. For alternate titles, we have a bunch. The Crime at Black Dudley had a US title of The Black Dudley Murder. Both titles are basically the same thing. I prefer The Crime at Black Dudley. That sounds a little more British country house to me. Look to the Lady had a US title of The Girth Chalice Mystery, very Philo Vance title. The Girth Chalice Mystery better explains the plot in terms of both actual story and tone. There's almost a little like Arthurian legend feel to this book, so I think I prefer that. Not that Look to the Lady is a bad title at all, I just think The Girth Chalice is a little better. Sweet Danger has two alternate titles, Kingdom of Death and The Fear Sign. All three of these titles are very good. I like the thought of danger being sweet as if it's enticing. I would stick with Sweet Danger for that reason alone. Kingdom of Death and The Fear Sign are both very apt and very fitting titles, very creative as well. I have no issues with those. Flowers for the Judge has the US title of Legacy and Blood. I think I prefer Legacy and Blood. And, I think that's a very fitting title plot wise. Flowers for the Judge, that's like a really old expression. I think it's lost meaning nowadays. Judges used to carry flowers in prisons to protect them from, like all the diseases and the stench of the jails. It's a very old custom. I don't think people recognize that anymore. I like the idea of that title for this book. It's not a bad title, and I always say the books need to feel like they came from the time they were written in, but unfortunately I don't think anyone really understands that title anymore. Dancers in Mourning has a US title of Who Killed Chloe. Dancers in Mourning is way better. Who Killed Chloe sounds like a 2020 special. Dancers in Mourning really sets that tone. It is so evocative of a theatrical setting, and you can really picture like dancers crying and decked out in black. And when you hear that title, it's so much better than Who Killed Chloe. Trader's Purse has a US title of The Sabotage Murder Mystery. Trader's Purse is a little bit of a spoiler, to be honest. I mean, not really, but I do prefer that title to Sabotage Murder Mystery because, this isn't really a murder mystery. There is a murder, but the larger picture is on the wartime espionage stuff. I think calling this a murder mystery is a bit misleading, but not totally false. Coroner's Pigeon has a US title of Pearls Before Swine, and this one conflicted me. On the one hand, I'm not really sure a lot of casual readers know what the word pigeon means, and I think referencing the coroner almost misses the point of this novel. On the other hand, Pearls Before Swine is a very fitting title. I think people know what it means. It's a biblical quote title, but it is a very common title. There's a lot of books and things playing off that phrase. And I like Corner's Pigeon as a title and book. It's my favorite Campion novel, but I do think I will select Pearls Before Swine as an all encompassing title while getting the point across. It's a clue, but not a spoiler. You have to read the novel to understand it. The Beckoning Lady has a US title of The Estate of the Beckoning Lady, and I think the shorter is better. The Beckoning Lady being a play on the name of the inn, but also the government coming for Margery Allingham's tax money. I think the word estate further emphasizes the second meaning, but I still think shorter is better. It still comes across. And finally, Hide My Eyes has two alternate titles. Tether's End and Ten Were Missing. I don't really like any of these titles. Tether's End, I guess, is the best. I like the idea of someone being at their tether's end where everything is unraveling. Not sure this is necessarily the best book for that title, but I don't particularly like the other options. Not much to talk about with Philo Vance. All of these titles are, the blank blank mystery. I sometimes cringe at the theme names here. They sound awfully cheesy and get a bit cutesy. Van Dyne doesn't go that route too often, but like the Gracie Allen mystery is very cringy to me. But the novel does feature Gracie Allen, so there's that. Nero Wolfe is up next. Rick Stout doesn't theme his titles, but he does sometimes have like a trend. There's too many cooks, too many women, too many clients, the mother hunt, the father hunt, death of a doxy, death of a dude. It's fine because it doesn't get childish. Rick Stout had a knack for finding the right quote titles to use. Some Buried Caesar is from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and Be a Villain from Hamlet. One may smile and be a villain. The Doorbell Rang is a great title. It's both literal and figurative. Family Affair is a very good title as well. It has two meanings that fit very well. If you've read the story, you know what I mean. It's not a spoiler at all. And there are some good less good titles for Nero Wolfe, and not too bad. The Red Box, the Rubber Band are a little generic. I mean, not terribly so, since they do work with their novels. I've always found Murder by the Book to be almost a cliche title to the point of cutesiness. Something similar with like Over My Dead Body and A Right to Die. They're good titles because they match the novels, but I don't get the sense a lot of thought was really put into them. A Right to Die is also, particularly may not have aged well. I mean, that book deals with the civil rights era. It's not like insulting to civil rights fighters, but I could see where maybe you would want to avoid using that title for that book. And there are plenty of titles with alternate names. Fair de Lance was once published under the name Point of Death. I should say with Nero Wolfe and others, but especially with Nero Wolfe. The alternate titles are mostly the titles of abridged versions that appeared in magazines. They're not like true alternate titles, though some of them are. Point of Death is fine, but this is such an iconic and influential book. I'm just going to stick with Fair de Lance and keep my fingers crossed people get the reference. It's not so obscure. The League of Frightened Men is also called The Frightened Men, and while I normally say shorter is better, I'm going to pick The League of Frightened Men here because that indicated this group these men have. They have a fraternity, it's a group. It's not like the individual men that are important, but the whole collective group. The Rubber Band is also called To Kill Again, another really generic title. Might as well just stick with the Rubber Band because at least that's more specific and fits the novel's plot better. Some Buried Caesar was also called The Red Bull, and as I already explained, Some Buried Caesar is a fantastic title. Red Bull is a little generic and also has a Google problem. If you Google Red Bull, you're going to get the energy drink. Now, that was not a problem for Rex Stout, but Some Buried Caesar is still a fantastic title anyway. Where There's a Will was also called Sisters in Trouble. This was tough. Where There's a Will is one of those ones that falls into like the slightly cheesy cliche category, but still fits the novel very well. And when you Google that title, you don't get entries for the book without also putting in like Rex Stout or Nero Wolfe. Sisters in Trouble works very well. I actually don't find it that intriguing necessarily, but I would say that's the better title. Prisoner's Base had a working title of Dare Base. It was never published under that title. Rex Stout was asked to change it to Prisoner's Base because both titles refer to the children's game, similar to like a tag. Stout always called it Dare Base, but when this book was published, the game was popularly called Prisoner's Base. So I think Prisoner's Base is probably the better title to use. Champagne for One had a working title of Champagne for Faith Usher. Faith Usher is the book's victim. And I always say it's better to keep character names out of the title. Readers scanning book titles don't know these fictional one-time characters. Champagne for One sounds very glitzy and glamorous and deadly as well, so I prefer that title. Josephine Tey has very good titles. I think all 8 of her titles are spectacular. They're all very creative and evocative and mysterious. Also set the right mood and make me wonder about the books. I can't even pick like a best one. I mean, The Daughter of Time is so good. Truth is the Daughter of Time. That's a quote from Francis Bacon. The Singing Sands made me think of like this far off desert paradise. A Shilling for Candles, a little devious. It also makes me wonder, before I read the book, like what does that mean in a good way? Tay does have 2 books with alternate titles. The Man in the Queue had a U.S. title of Killer in the Crowd. Obviously, in the U.S., the word queue not as common. We say line, although I have noticed the word queue is actually being used much more often in the U.S. as of late. I mean, The Man in the Queue is a much better title. It's so mysterious. Who is the man in the queue? Is he a victim, the murderer, someone else? It's all very intriguing. Killer in the Crowd sounds a little cutesy. Not a fan of these titles that are like the blank in the blank or on the blank. I mean, that title structure is being overused quite a bit recently. I mean, technically, The Man in the Queue also follows that structure, but it's a much better title. And Bratfarer is also called Come and Kill Me, which is a fun title, but I do prefer Bratfarer. I mean, that name of that character is just ripe for a title, and the story really is about Bratfarer. I mean, the murder stuff, while important, is almost secondary to like the whole scheme he's pulling off. I mean, the fact that the title character's name is Brat is just a joy as well. Very fitting. I mean, Come and Kill Me is a great title, though. I think probably it's a good title for a different book, but not this one. And finally, Sherlock Holmes. There's only 4 novels. All of them are great titles. A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of Four, Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Valley of Fear. All of those titles are really iconic to me. I'm not going to go through all of the short stories. I mean, that's really the bulk of the Sherlock content, but just to keep things consistent, I don't want to get like too into these since I didn't go into the other short story titles, but still, they're very important, so I'll just pick a few out. I remember reading these for the first time as a younger kid, probably like 12-ish I was, and being mesmerized by the titles because I didn't really know what any of the titles were referring to. And most of them are like The Adventure of the Blank, but I mean, just some of these titles are The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, The Five Orange Pips, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, Adventure of Silver Blaze, The Adventure of the Six Napoleons, The Adventure of the Devil's Foot, just to name a few. All of those to me really just like made me wonder what the story was about in a good way. And that is it for this video. Let me know what you think about these titles and my opinions of them. I'm sure you have your own opinions. Next week, I have 6 more Agatha Christie conspiracies, theories, unanswered questions, what have you, that I will try to provide an answer for and some context. I know these are very popular, and keep the ideas coming for this and for other videos as well. Until next time, Mystery Files.